and welcome back to this year's International Feature Conference 2021. I hope you had fruitful discussions, and I'm happy to inform you we are right on time and back on track. Motto of this year's IFC, I think you have already noticed, is the power of narrative. And for us as feature makers, probably there is one meaning which is a bit closer to our heart, the power of narration, the power of storytelling. But there is another meaning of the power of narrative, is the struggle about opinion, perhaps about worldviews, beliefs, is the battle for a narrative. Kübra Gümüşay will be our guest in this plenary, brings different perspectives and languages to this table. Hamburg born and based, she has also been studying and living in Oxford. She's a TEDx talker, and she writes about racism, feminism, diversity, and she speaks at least 3 languages. This is German, English, and Turkish. Her recent book will be published in English, but is not available yet, but has been a bestseller in Germany. It deals with the connection between the way we talk and we form our reality, our beliefs, and our beings. One question she always mentions, or seems to be at the heart or the center of her thoughts, is how can we avoid to discriminate people by language, but rather see them really eye to eye? And this has been of a team which translated, she has been a team, which translated Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem, The Hill We Climb, into German. And we are very happy to have you here. Kübra, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
The plenary will work like this. Kübra will give us a short input, about 15, 20 minutes, roughly about like this. We will elaborate on this, on her thesis, after this in a short interview. And after this, the public stream will be closed and we will open up the Q&A session for you as delegates. And all in all, as it has been yesterday, it will take us roughly an hour. To enhance the participation, it has already been working in the special. Please raise your digital hand and we will try to make sure that you can go on screen and ask Kübra the question you would like to ask yourself. So Kübra, this is you, and we are very looking forward to your input.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing a space where we can dive deeper into the architecture of language, because as we're talking today about the power of narratives, about the power of stories, I think it also helps to dive deeper and actually explore the structure of what is around us, to see the water that is around us, and to explore how it enables us to see the world, but how it also can allow us to travel through the world, but maybe also create barriers between people. So I'm going to read a few excerpts of my book, Language and Being, and I look forward to the discussion we're going to have afterwards. Stories are magical. We're currently in different parts of the world, and yet by exchanging these sounds, by speaking a common language, we're able to travel and imagine together, dive into the lives of our friends and complete strangers, into lives of the past, the present, the future, and into the lives of those who've never existed and are just pure products of our imagination. When we narrate stories, we transform our thoughts and impressions into sounds, into language. But are those words yours? Is this language yours? Through the eyes of which group of people are you looking at the world by using certain words? Can you exist in a language that you were never meant to use, never meant to speak, but be spoken about? I lead the form across into the world of it, Martin Buber. What came first, our language or our perception? On a warm summer's night, many years ago, in the harbour of a small town in southwest Turkey, we were drinking black tea and shelling salted sunflower seeds with a languid rapidity. My aunt gazed at the sea, into the deep, calm darkness, and said, "Look how bright that yakamoz is." I followed her eyes, but couldn't see any bright light anywhere. "Where?" I asked. Again, she pointed at the sea, but I still didn't know what she meant. Laughing, my parents explained the meaning of the word yakamoz. It describes the moon's reflection on the water. And now I too saw it shining brightly in the darkness ahead of me, yakamoz. I now see it every time I go for a nocturnal stroll by the sea and wonder, do the other people around me see it too? Even those who don't know the word yakamoz. because language can inform our perception. I know the word, hence I perceive what it means. If you speak a second language, you surely think of numerous terms that describe phenomena, situations, or emotions for which there is no direct English counterpart. The Japanese word komorebi describes sunlight shimmering through the leaves of trees. Ghurfa, an Arabic word, describes the amount of water you can cup in the palm of your hand. The Greek word meraki describes the ardent passion, love and energy with which someone devotes themselves to a task. And imagine this, you're walking through an unfamiliar city and someone gives you directions. You listen carefully, but no sooner have you set off again than you realize that you've already forgotten what they've said. Hawaiian has a word for it, akihi. Many languages, such as Indonesian, Turkish, Japanese, Finnish, and Farsi, have no gender-specific pronouns at all. No he, she, or it. The cognitive scientist, Laura Boroditsky, describes a conversation she has had with someone whose native language was Indonesian. They were talking in Indonesian about a friend of Boroditsky's. Her interlocutor, who didn't know her friend, asked her all sorts of questions about them. But it wasn't until his 21st question that he asked whether the friend was a man or a woman. Boroditsky was surprised. Could it be possible that this person had spent the entire conversation imagining a person of undetermined gender? What about you? Would you be able to listen to a story about a person, ask follow-up questions, and even imagine the person without an urge to know this person's gender? When it comes to the perception of space and time, the language of the Tayor in Northern Australia is particularly interesting. Cook Tayor has no word for left or right. Tayor instead use compass points, cardinal directions. For example, there is an ant on your northwestern arm, or can you move the cup to the southeast, please? The Tayor can indicate precisely the cardinal directions, even when in completely enclosed rooms, by the age of 5 or even 4. When two Tayor meet, their greeting involves asking the other person where they are going. Even during small talk then, speakers are encouraged to name the cardinal directions, which are such an elementary and inherent constituent of the language and perception. Later, Boroditsky described what happened when she tried to learn this language, Cook Tayor. I had this cool experience when I was there. You know, I was trying to stay oriented because people were treating me like I was pretty stupid for not being oriented, and that hurt. And so I was trying to keep track of which way is which. And one day, I was walking along and I was just staring at the ground. And all of a sudden, I noticed that there was a new window that had popped up in my mind. And it was like a bird's eye view of the landscape that I was walking through. And I was a little red dot that was moving across the landscape. And then when I turned, this little window stayed locked on the landscape, but it turned in my mind's eye. And I thought, oh, this makes it so much easier. Now I can stay oriented too. When Lera Boroditsky told a Tayor about this strange experience, strange for her that is, he laughed and asked, how else were you meant to stay oriented in this world? With its grammatical structures, rules and norms, our language influences not only our perception of place, but also perception of time. How does time pass for you? If I ask you as an English speaker to put pictures of someone in chronological order from childhood to adulthood, you would probably start left and move on to the right, starting at the left with childhood photos and then moving on. In German, in English, and in all Roman languages, we write and read from left to right, and this is also how we perceive time. Speakers of Hebrew or Arabic would do the opposite. But how would the Tayor arrange those pictures? The answer is sometimes from left to right, sometimes from right to left, sometimes from the back to the front, sometimes from the front to the back. What matters to them is how they sit and where they sit. For Tayor, time flows from the east to the west. So if the person was sitting facing north, this person would arrange the pictures from the right to the left. And if the person would be sitting at the opposite direction, it would direct those pictures in the opposite direction as well. This perception of time and the world has left a lasting impression on me. Only by comparison can we discern the worldview that we've been taught. Everything centers on us. In fact, it centers on I and its unique perceptions. I turn, and the world turns with me. What if we spoke a language like Tayor, which would forever remind us of that we are nothing but a tiny dot on a gigantic map, that time flows over us, regardless of where I am? What principles, what humility would characterize our attitude to other people, to living creatures, to nature? Those who live between languages, they are able to see them, the barriers that extend through linguistic worlds. Those who live between languages, they know them, the limitations of translations, the impossibility. It is as if you had to squeeze a whole world through the eye of a needle of a language. Because when you translate from one language to another, it is not just words for which you seek a counterpart. Instead, you require an equivalent for wide, complex, multifaceted contexts, a perspective, a specific way of regarding the world. Purpuri, the force which causes mushrooms to push up from the earth overnight. When biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer first read the word Purpuri, a word from the language of her ancestors, the citizen Potawatomi, an indigenous people of North America, she was amazed that such a word even existed. As a biologist, scientist, and botanist, she felt the gap that the absence of this word in other languages created in her, but also in science. Because what happens when you use the word Purpuri? How do you view the world? In fact, another question seems even more remarkable. From which perspective do you regard the world? You look at the world from the perspective of the earth, not from above, looking down at the plants that grow up to meet you, the human being, but from below, at the very bottom. You look at the world from the earth's perspective, up into the sky, past the human beings who constantly believe themselves to be at the center of the world. How would you speak differently had we lived in a language that revealed the world to us from the earth's viewpoint? A language like that of the citizen Potawatomi, in which plants are not spoken of as it, but rather referred to as respectfully as humans, because they are understood as living beings that also have a perspective on this world. How would our perception change? How would we live differently? How would our relationship with Earth, with nature, change? In an interview, Kimmerer described a situation in which she asked her environmental science students the following question. She asked, "Do you love the Earth?" They wholeheartedly agree that they love the Earth. But when I ask them the question, "Does the Earth love you back?" there's a great deal of hesitation and reluctance and eyes cast down like, "Oh gosh, I don't know. Are we even allowed to talk about that?" That would mean that the Earth had agency and that I was not anonymous, that I was not an anonymous little blip on the landscape, that I was known by my home place. And what happens when these languages are no longer spoken? What do we lose? We lose far more than just words, far more than yet another name for something we all perceive and see. We lose a perspective on this world. We lose eyes. We lose what is beyond the narrow confines of our respective languages. Like thousands of other indigenous children, Robin Wall Kimmerer's grandfather was forcefully taken from his family when he was 9 years old and forced to live in a boarding school where children were not allowed to speak their native languages. Today, many indigenous languages in North America are endangered, including Potawatomi. One summer, Kimmerer attended a course to learn the languages of her ancestors. The language class was eagerly anticipated. Kübra writes, because all the living speakers of Potawatomi were to be present to teach. And they came, on canes, with walking aids, in wheelchairs. Kübra counted them. 9. 9 fluent speakers in the whole world. Our language, millennia in the making, sits on those 9 chairs. The words that praised creation, told the old stories, lulled my ancestors to sleep, rest today in the tongues of 9 very mortal men and women. One of the men told them how his mother hid him when the children were abducted, and how he stayed behind as a carrier of language. The man turned to the group. We are the end of the road. We are all that is left. If you young people do not learn the language will die. The missionaries and the US government will have their victory at last. Then Kübra said, an elderly woman pushed her walker close to the microphone and said, it's not just the words that will be lost. The language is the heart of our culture. It holds our thoughts, our way of seeing the world. It is too beautiful for English to explain. No language captures the whole world. Each language captures only part of it. Each language only grasps and experiences as much as those people who have power and dominion in a language experience themselves. Each linguistic world only reaches as far as the perception of the rulers and the powerful. That is why people are needed who wander back and forth between languages, people who extend languages, expand them. These are people who, although and precisely because they do not belong to the powerful and the ruling class, introduce new perspectives into languages, along with their broad context, complexity and richness of facets. People who know the meaning of aciziyet, weakness, helplessness, incapacity, are the words that automatic translation softwares offer to me when I look for a translation of this Turkish word. But aciziyet means so much more. A word that makes me look at the world from the bottom up, to feel powerlessness and helplessness, the absence of possibilities, the unattainability of things, and to endure. Yet I don't consider this term to be negative. There's a strange freedom associated with it. For aciziyet also evokes the calm perception of a situation to which a person is exposed. A liberated acceptance of one's life's circumstances, not humiliating inferiority, but respectful deference. Perhaps the emancipated awareness of our nullity is one of the few truths we can grasp in its completeness, our aciziyet. To be at the edge of a linguistic horizon, we must be aware of it, our aciziyet, our dependence on all those people who view the world differently than we do, so that we can stand at the edge of a linguistic horizon and cross it with the help of others, into other languages, into words that may not yet exist in our world. In his 1960 essay, The Hollow Miracle, the literary theorist, philosopher, and Holocaust survivor George Steiner wrote, "Everything forgets, but not language. When it has been injected with falsehood, only the most drastic truth can cleanse it." Steiner was referring to the language of post-war Germany. He regretted the fact that this process hadn't happened there, that the German language was instead marked by dissimulation and deliberate forgetting. He wasn't concerned with language as such, but with how it shapes thought and action, with the relations between language and political inhumanity. The relations between language and political inhumanity. This is what I want to visualize and analyze. I would like to explore how we might speak differently, more humanely. Kurt Tucholsky wrote that language is a weapon. Yes, it may be that, and is that much too often, even if those who use a language, a word, are not aware of this fact. But it needn't be. Language can also be a tool. It can show us the luminous reflection of moonlight in the darkness of night. Language can limit our world, but also reveal its infinity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kübra. It's a big audience here, at least 12, up to 15 people are sitting there. Please, if you grab the headphones in a second, then you will be able to listen to the questions coming in. Before we do the Q&A, just...
Shall I put it on now or wait?
We'll discuss a few questions first, and then when we open up to the Q&A session, then it would be okay to get them. As you yourself pointed out, that different languages broaden your horizon. Did you ever feel, I don't know, the opposite, like overwhelmed by it? Because it's like complex, it's so complex, or a complexity you can experience. Probably you got new paths with new languages to other areas you've never been to, but on the other hand side, there could be, I don't know, dangerous, frightening, overwhelming. Did you ever experience stuff like that?
Actually, you know, the language I mentioned, and the word Purpuri and the language of the Potawatomi, that language to me was actually mind-blowing, because they not only have he, she, it as personal pronouns, but many more for plants and trees and stones and you know, all kinds of animals and even mountains. And that sort of blew my mind, because this language sort of forces me to look back at human beings, not only look at the world through human eyes. So that was actually something I found to be incredibly helpful, to maybe use this in discussions about, you know, climate justice. How would we treat nature if we were always reminded that nature looks back at us, that we don't rule over the world through our language, which doesn't allow them to speak about us, and how that power balance would maybe shift. And something else that always frightens me when speaking about language and its power is that, you know, I remember the first time I walked into my son's room, and then he was sitting there dreaming. He was there physically
Sleeping?
present. No. Like, you know, daydreaming.
Daydreaming. Okay. Like sitting there.
Yeah, sitting there,
mind,
and you could see in his eyes that he wasn't in the room. And to me, it showed me that he is now experiencing a facet of language that allows him to travel. But it also saddened me, because he was the one who always pulled me out of that space into the physical presence. And what frightens me about this is that sometimes on the street or in political debates, you sometimes meet human beings who are physically present but not mentally. You know, their eyes are not
Somewhere
there.
else.
Yeah, and they are incapable of seeing the human in you. And that is always so frightening, because you can't do anything about this. There's so many walls between you and this person. Like waving wouldn't help, screaming wouldn't help, because this person views you from an abstract perspective. And as much as this power is helpful to create empathy for people you've never met, as much as this is a positive aspect, it can have the exact opposite effect as well. Yeah, and this is actually something that frightens me when really trying to grasp the power of language.
I've been thinking, when I was preparing for this session, I've been thinking about a debate we have in Germany quite prominent over the last, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 years, when you talk about that nature has some gender things.
Yeah.
And of course we have this gender debate, how we name things, like, I don't know whether it's still a debate, because it has become part of mainstream news, for example, but it's still, there seems to be some resistance of some special kind of people. So my question is, does this, for example, if you think about nature and about different genders, does this reflect on other debates, let's say on the gender debate we have in Germany as well, that you think, well, look, this is ridiculous, when even in other languages there are different names for gender, then we should do this, of course, in our own language.
I think what the underlying problem in these debates is usually that a certain group of people is asking for change, for more for a more just structure, and others claim that it's always been like this. And you have this exact debate in various fields. It's not only limited to feminist discourses. But sometimes when I look at these debates, they appear ridiculous because it's like moving into a house that you've built yourself, because languages are built by us. They are not God-given. They didn't drop down from somewhere and we just found them and lived with it, but these are things we've created. And it's like building a house and then moving in, and at one point your children are like, I think it'd be better if the staircase was in the house rather than outside, or shall we move the toilet to into the house next to the bathroom, or maybe you should have running water. And then saying, no, it's always been like this. We can't change it. No, we can change it. And visualizing language as a form of architecture sort of helps to see the ridiculous ways we are having these discussions, because what these people are asking for is not to say all of it is bad or we shouldn't have it, or let's destroy all of it, but rather let's enhance it. Let's allow language to accommodate us. Let us maybe destroy a few walls, or maybe unlock a door. And so you mentioned in the introduction, we did the translation of Amanda Gorman's poem during for the inauguration in the US, and there was a destructive debate going on all around Europe, where there were countries who were translating this poem, and to me it was, being in the eye of the storm. It was just. If I remember correctly, the question was, should you were a team of 3, should you, as not black people, translate a black poet's poem? The funny thing was, no one said that. Like Jenny Style, who criticized the Flemish, Niederländisch? Yeah, the Dutch. The Dutch translator. She didn't say, only a black person is allowed to translate a black artist or a poem. She was rather saying, it's a mischance. It's more should have. Yeah, she said this would have had been an opportunity to elevate other voices who in this but she has business. She has a point there. Yeah, and she has a point. And then we've had this huge debate about, are black people, are white people allowed to translate black writers, which is completely ridiculous because no one proposed that. And we, as a team of 3, there was Uda Strätling, who is a professional translator, who's translated for centuries, and then Hadija Haruna Ölka, who is a journalist, an activist, who deals with language, who knows very well the black diaspora, and is a black person herself, and myself. So we did this in a team of 3, and we decided to do this as a team even before any of these debates had started. And when this debate was going on, it was weird because to us it was like a joyful opportunity and like a dance, because we were dancing with language. And yes, we could have translated. But is it a bit of a feeling of I don't know, triumph is a strong word, but when you see the debate in other countries say, well, look, we've been there, we did that, we came to the conclusion before you did. That was our plan from the start. You know what I mean? Like we didn't have the chance to actually feel that superiority, because I think within a day or so, this destructive debate started in Germany. And what I found most saddening was that people didn't see this as an opportunity. Because we weren't saying, this is how you should translate, or you always have to do it in a team of 3 with these exact identities. What we were rather saying is, let's try things. Let's bring different perspectives onto the table and see and watch how this table then widens, and how 3 people can sort of expand each other and then because what we're aiming to do is not a literal translation, but also trying to translate those contexts that I've been talking about. And that's a huge task. And this is what we've been trying. And I had wished for more people to see this as an opportunity rather than, only having this very dogmatic view of, are we now only allowed to translate poems in a team of 3 and all these like do's and don'ts. This was a chance.
Would you say this is, I don't know, a special kind of German narrative that we look at the negative side first and say, well, look, it's you should have done it like this, or there should be different ways. It's like, I don't know, a German narrative, or
it actually happened in many other countries. So in this case, I can't say that this is specific or purely German. This happened in other countries as well.
So how long, just to get a grasp of it, is it like it happened within days? I mean, it's not like a long poem, but it's difficult anyway.
It was within days, but we were having discussions until late in the night, and to me it was a very joyful experience. The debate about it wasn't so much joyful, but doing it and working with these wonderful women was a very beautiful experience.
Perhaps this is a good point to stop, or to say finish the public streaming and open up the Q&A session. If I'm correct, there is a question from Anna, and we try to get her on screen. And if you can hear us, please open up your microphone so Kübra gets the chance to hear you, and in the best of worlds, see you at the same time on screen. There we go. Anna.
Hi, I hope I hear you because it's a kind of fuzzy. Thank you very much. It's so interesting to think about language. And my first question, out of 2 questions, would be, why do you think discourse around language often gets so harsh, as you just explained? Why don't we cope more playfully or more open with our own language?
I think it is because David Foster Wallace has this beautiful analogy where he describes 2 young fish swimming in the water, and then they meet this old wise fish swimming into the opposite direction, and then the old wise fish says, hey guys, how's the water? And then the 2 young fish nod and then move on. And after a while, one says to the other, what the hell is water? And I think language is like water to many people. They don't even see it. They don't see the architecture of language. They don't see how it builds walls between you and others. They don't see how it oppresses. They don't see how it can suffocate people. They don't see how language can be violent and oppressive. And because they don't see it as a structure, because they can't grasp this water, they can't see it as an entity, I think these discussions about language become either absurd to them, or they feel like these discussions are trying to change the very foundations of a society, and they don't see these as opportunities to literally open doors and welcome new perspectives into this building. This is why in my book I first tried to swim into other waters, into other languages, some of the languages I've mentioned, because when you dive into all these other waters and then come back to your own pond or your own ocean, you realize its shortcomings, and until you as an individual don't realize the shortcomings of the structures around you, you won't realize that there's a need for change. And I think this is the very reason why oftentimes there are so many harsh reactions. Yeah.
And there's room for a second question.
Yes, there's this discussion, for example, about the N-word, but it's some more words as well. And my question was, what do you think? Is it helpful to ban the words and to just not take them into your mouth anymore? Or would it rather be important to change society first so that people don't even want to use the words anymore? Because, there's this discussion about cancel culture and all the stuff.
Yeah. I think things have to happen simultaneously. There is no one way forward. You need to explain what this word means and what it causes, but you also need to create spaces where these words are just not being used, where you don't reproduce it by even talking about it all the time. And I think most people don't understand the reason why you shouldn't use a word like this. And one beautiful example for understanding the gravity of it is imagine a guy from Spain who wants to travel to Mexico on a boat, and he does exactly that, but somehow loses his way and arrives at Hamburg in Germany at the port, and then this is his discovery of Hamburg. But this discovery of Hamburg, of his and his personal story, doesn't end up being his personal, individual discovery, but rather the discovery of Hamburg in world history, as if there was nothing else there, as if there were no people, no history, no culture. And imagine these people now being oppressed, murdered, forced into slavery, and on top of all, then being named Mexicanians, because originally he was on his way to Mexico. And using this word all the time to describe these people, yes, it might be just a word, but this word would also carry the weight of all the things done and by the people who were talking about these people in this manner, in this way. So words are not only yet another way to describe something, but it can also be a perception on reality. And if we choose to use certain words, especially when it comes to naming people, we also take a stance in how we view these people. Do we allow these people to in this room to share their perspective? Do we allow them to open their perspective so that we might look at the world through their eyes? Or are we constantly, stubbornly trying to only look at the world through a very narrow set of eyes that dehumanizes others? And if you look at these debates from this angle, you realize how unnecessary it is to use these words, and how much of the world is missing by always trying to use words that have this very limited, dehumanizing, destructive and violent perspective on the world. And at the end of the day, when I have these discussions with people, I always ask them, what kind of human do you aim to be? Is this like your peak moment in life? Is that who you want to become? A person that talks in such a derogatory way about others? Is this your aim? And to me, it's not about prohibiting words. It's about aiming for a more just way of talking to each other and about each other. And I think it's more important to create spaces and stories and narratives where we are exploring a more nuanced perspective of the world, rather than having discussions about the destructive way of looking at the world.
Thank you, Anna, for your questions. So, Kübra, would you say it comes down to respect and knowledge? Because respect people, if they, first of all, it's not a title or a word they gave themselves. They call themselves without words. So it's a question of respect and a question of knowledge, like historical context.
Yes, and also I think respecting yourself. You're right. If I respect myself, I know where my limitations are, and only if we, have some sense of humility, we will be able to be respectful to ourselves and to others. And oftentimes, especially when being allowed to tell stories is such a powerful tool, but it's also a tool you can use to silence others. By telling the story of a group of people on their behalf, change through
talking about somebody, but not talking with somebody.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you won't misuse this power if you are aware of your limitations. And that's what I oftentimes find missing in whether political debates, but also debates on journalism, because the task of journalists, of storytellers, are not to tell the world, oh, this is how it is, and that's it, but rather, show that they have different pieces of the puzzle and trying to put them into context and sort of, offer something to the world, rather than saying, this is the only way you are allowed to see the world.
So it's about not only one narrative, but the possibility of different narratives connected with the storyteller's attitude, so to say. I don't know, but this is what I can offer. It's a question of attitude, isn't it?
I think it's difficult, but I find it very inspiring task, and that is to put things into context, right? It's such a joyful thing to do. When you hear a story, to try and think about where does it fit into this world. It's like, this old philosophical image of, this dark room where there's a big elephant, and then people walk in and are supposed to describe this elephant, and some say, oh, it's, very soft and long. Someone else says, oh, it's very thin and hairy, and someone else says it's,
Big
very
ears.
big and leathery, and all of these people are right. And your task as a journalist, as a storyteller, as someone, a political commentator, is to put these perspectives into perspective. and that is such a joyful thing to do, because it is like, shining more light onto reality.
But then as a journalist, I have to accept that probably I don't have the truth, that I don't are the wise person in the room. I have to accept that I'm not presenting the truth as it is. You know what I mean? It's like,
that's exactly
it probably shatters your self-image as a journalist. Like, this is what we have reported, and I'm telling you now how the world is.
Yeah, and that's the humility I'm talking about that we lack. We have this in so many other parts of our world, where we claim to know the absolute and universal truth. And I'm not saying that there are no universal values. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, all is relative and, there's nothing we could agree on. But it's rather training yourself and others to be able to put pieces of puzzles together, rather than claiming, because when we look back at the example of the elephant. This example perfectly summarizes the whole debate we've had on the role of the police. To some people, the police is, a symbol of security and trust. And, they say, oh, it's so, soft and long, and I can't imagine this animal to ever be able to kill someone, right? How can something so soft and be able to, suffocate someone by his pure weight? And someone else who is lying under this elephant and is about to suffocating says, I very well can imagine this, because this is how I experienced this elephant. And if we live in the illusion of our world to be limited to what we perceive, we will never be able to see what is there in the room. To be able to see the world, we are in need of other people who have probably completely different perspectives on the world. And this is, to some people, this seems to look like a threat, because they want only perspectives that sort of support their own. And they don't see the value in perspectives that question theirs. But this is where human beings, storytellers, come into place.
I was always wondering about that, because you have been to talk shows, you have been in many interviews and so on, and I'm always wondering about, because you say we have to be more, you put it this way, you said we had to be more humanely was, I think, the words you used. So how do we do this? Is it like our first perception should be, or attitude should be, first of all, I would like to understand you, question you more in a way to understand and not in a way to contradict? You know what I mean? Is this a first step to make this happen?
I think in political discussions, oftentimes people, even when they think they listen to the other person, they're just looking for cues to know which
to
sort
drop
of
in. Oh, sorry,
box
I
to
noted
put
it
you.
exactly. Sorry.
Yeah, and this is what they do. And you're not properly listening to someone if you are just waiting for the key points, keywords. Oh yeah, I'm going to put this box into the category of this and that political opinion. And only if we truly listen and see this person as an individual, we will be able to come forward in a discussion and leave these political discussions aside. We also do this in our daily lives, right? You meet someone and then you have this maybe very interesting, inspiring discussion. At one point, this person just mentions his or her profession, and then there's this wall between you and this person because you only see now the projections onto this person rather than...
You're a journalist, you're a lawyer, you're whatever.
Yeah. You guys are like, for this newspaper, I know what kind of person you're. You're a teacher, you guys are lazy, blah, 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 blah. And then you have this, obviously, in a more drastic way where people don't even need to reveal their professions to have a wall between them and others, but people who are, based on their religion, their gender, their race, or their perceived race, or their perceived gender, their perceived religion, are put into a box. And this is what I described in the very first, when we started this conversation, where you are standing in front of another person, and this person is completely unable to see you. And again, the power of narrative, this is where this comes into place, because stories allow us to walk into the lives of complete strangers and look at the world through their eyes. But if we tell the story of a stranger through the eyes of people who look at them as the other, you don't tell their stories. You only tell their stories if you yourself, as the narrator, if you yourself have opened up and looked at the world through their eyes. This is a narrative that is powerful. This is a narrative that not misuses power on people, but rather uses a narrative as a power to look at the world from a different angle and then to widen your worldview and horizon.
Would it be okay if I ask you one or two personal questions?
Yeah, sure.
Because I was wondering about that, there's been so many people criticizing, would be a very friendly word, criticizing you in many different ways. So how do you manage on a personal level? How do you manage to open up every time? I can imagine it's exhausting because you think, I know I have to do the first step. I know I have to build a connection. This connection is only happening if I myself open up.
Yeah.
But I, at least for myself, I can say I sometimes find this very exhausting. I don't know about you.
So the moment where I feel privileged to experience it, as cynical as it might sound, is because then I'm confronted with someone who has a completely different perspective on the world than I do. And I'm used to sort of, experiencing this because...
doesn't make it less hurtful, does it?
It doesn't make it less hurtful, but it allows me to widen my perspective. But the moment it becomes hurtful is that there's nothing I can do. And that's because that sort of shows me the shortcomings, the helplessness one has. Even if you speak, you're not being heard. And to be completely honest, that is probably the most hurtful things, to me at least, when having discussions about our discourse on political debates and how we speak and language, is you speak but they don't hear you, because there's so many walls, so thick, that there's no way to walk around it. And I've tried so many times, like sometimes I would call these people and have personal conversations. I've even met some of these people and tried to have a conversation.
Does it make a difference?
It doesn't make it, it sometimes does, but I've also had one in particular where literally this person was unable to see me. And I could see it. I don't know if you've ever experienced such a thing. And this is what I mentioned earlier as, scary. And it took me days to sort of overcome this, because you stand in front of a person and this person has so many projections onto you that your light is not shining through, right?
Yeah, I know.
And of all the things I've experienced, these moments are the hurtful ones, because then I know it doesn't help. I'm not able to reach this person. But it also, means I can't do anything anymore. It's this person.
You only can change the things you can. Is it okay if I jump to the questions back, because the topic will change rapidly? Anna has posted another question asking about earlier, but how can we stay critical if we constantly put ourselves in other person's shoes?
This is being critical. I mean, how can you be more critical than putting yourself into the shoes of others? I mean,
but how do we know they, I don't know, don't play us, tell the truth, probably keeping a journalistic distance?
Oh, okay. Now I see.
I hope I imagine right what Anna means.
I mean, putting yourself into the shoes of others doesn't mean that you are immersed in that perspective, but that you take this perspective as well. And to give another example, so we've had in Germany this huge debate about refugees, and then there were people saying, refugees are rapists, and they all sexually harass women. And if you talk to a person who has this perspective, it doesn't help to say no, that's wrong, because most of the time a person who says that has read an article about it, or maybe has heard a story about it. The task then becomes to put it into perspective. Say, there was a person who acted in this and that way, but these are refugees, and this is the person you're talking about. And this is what we need to train. It is not to say, all truths have to stand next to each other, or they're all equal. It is like with the elephant. Yes, it is the nose of the elephant, but maybe the rest of this body is more relevant to our discourse right now. That is true as well, but it's not the only truth. The beautiful talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, where she talks about the danger of the single story, where a whole continent is reduced on one story, a whole people, a whole religion, a whole gender is reduced onto one story. And she gives this example of where she talks with a student who says, I love your novel, but it is so devastating to hear about African fathers who are so violent against their children, because in one of her novels there's a man who's a father who's violent towards his child. And she's like, I've also recently read a story, American Psycho, and it's so saddening that all young Americans turn into psychos and mass murders. And she does this. What she does here is she sort of puts a mirror and reflects what this person is doing. And what this person is doing is claiming to know all about one people by having one story. But this story is one story.
Generalization, which is not like.
And this is where what I say, when you put yourselves into the shoes of others, you're not supposed to accept everything they say as the ultimate truth, but rather learn how to put it into perspective. But you can only do that if you take their perspective
first. Brian is asking a question as well, or posting a question. He's wondering if an English translation of Kübra's book will be available anytime soon.
Yes, in early next year, hopefully.
And it's Language and Being, isn't it?
Yes, I don't know if we're going to probably have a discussion about this with the publishers. But
do you have a preferred title?
I actually like my book's title, but I'm not like, this is the only way it's supposed to work. But so the Italian translation was just published a few months ago, and they used it this way, and it worked very well.
I'm jumping back to a sentence you just said. I was just wondering, there's this TV series a couple of years back, The Newsroom. Have you ever seen it? It's a TV series from America, written by Aaron Sorkin. And it's about a journalistic newsroom, and they did the news in a very classical way. And then they decided, we do this completely different. And the level they set, or the bar they set, they say, we do the news. The most important thing is to deliver the most important arguments for the topic. And because you said something similar, do you think that is lacking in journalism, in narratives reproduced as journalists, that we not often enough look at, is this really the argument here, or are we jumping on our cue, are we jumping on keywords?
Yes, I think another task of a journalist, and it's a very hard task to, because it opens the door for so much misuse, but one of the tasks next to sort of putting things into context is what is relevant. Is it relevant to have a discourse right now about whether black people, only black people are allowed to translate books by black authors when no one has made that suggestion? Probably not, because it's a straw man. No one said that. It is a waste of lifetime, energy, attention, and but then also there are more destructive consequences, such as in Germany we've had this debate after one right-wing politician said about a German football player that people wouldn't want to have him as a neighbor because he's a black person. And then there were serious journalists on the street asking people whether they would want to have him as their neighbor. It's a complete waste of time, waste of resources, waste of attention. And sometimes they do it like, with this voyeuristic sort of motivation. And I think the reason why they might not be able to see how devastating the consequences of these kind of debates can be is because they just think it's a game. It's an abstract thing, right? Because you don't physically hurt anyone. So you have to see the person.
You have to see the person, that's right.
You don't physically hurt anyone. There's nothing physically happening. You don't see the consequences immediately. But if we take true responsibility for our profession, we are forced to see the consequences, even those that we didn't intend. But you learn from the consequences. You understand how powerful you are and how you might have misused your power without even having the intention to do so. So yes, I think being self-critical as a journalist, and I'm not saying we should. If you want to really grow in your profession, you should always be self-critical. I've done mistakes in my past. I engaged in debates where I would now say, you're way stupid. Like, why did you even enter a room where you think you have an equal seat at the table? You don't have an equal seat at the table. You are on the table, and you're an object, and people are like discussing you and your being. You're not an equal member of a discussion. And I've learned from these discussions, or another quote that sort of led to an existential crisis was by Nietzsche, who said that, roughly translated, if you make your living by chasing your enemy, you have an interest in keeping him alive. And I was like, how do I keep racism and sexism alive? And these kind of questions are important to ask yourself, so that you can. You are not just a product of your environment, but so that you can be an emancipated narrator, an emancipated journalist, an emancipated human being who, tries to be respectful and responsible with his or her power.
If I remember correctly, this episode became at least, or finally, some humorous touch, because the player you were talking about, he saved a goal in the next game, and it was, I think, Soccer World Championship, and there was Manuel Neuer as a goalkeeper of the German national team, and there was this famous photograph, and Neuer was like looking at the player, and then it was like, well, I love to have a neighbor like him. I think this was like a final, at least a humorous,
nice turn,
a humorous spin. Let's have two more. Leslie's asking, and circling back to the gender topic a bit, how does other societies deal with the gender topic? Does people want to talk about that, or is it, I don't know, especially harsh in Germany, or what are your experiences?
There's similar debates going on in other parts of the world as well, but especially when it comes to, maybe in the US, there are a lot of examples, not in terms of gender, but rather race. And you have these kind of discussions, at least in all the languages I speak, I've seen these discussions. Maybe not so much focused on gender as in Germany, because in Germany, in the German language.
No, a scientist in English can be a woman or a man.
Yes,
A Wissenschaftlerin or a Wissenschaftler is a difference.
Yeah, so they're gendered nouns, and there's another extent of looking at the world through a very gendered lens. But what I would want to add to this is that just because a language is doesn't, from its grammatical architecture, doesn't discriminate against women, it doesn't mean that the society is free of sexism. I mean, the Turkish language only uses or. They don't have gendered nouns. They don't have he, she, or it. They just have or. And in that sense, this language is quite gender equal, or at least not
less discriminating.
Less discriminative, but it's one of the countries with the highest femicide rates in the world. So I think it's also important to put into perspective that just language doesn't necessarily mean that the society is just. But what it shows us is that having an unjust language stands in your way as a society to become more just. So yes, language is powerful, but it's not deterministic. It's not like if you use this word, things will be completely different. Things happen simultaneously, and it's important to put things into perspective again. This is not the only fight we're supposed to have.
For the last question, I would like to circle back to the beginning of the talk we had now, and I hope it's okay if I ask him. If you don't want to answer, just say so. Do you have a language you're dreaming in? Like, because you were talking about your son, but he was daydreaming. But what about you? Or does this change wherever you live at the moment? How is it for you, if you want to answer?
I don't remember having a specific language, talking a specific language. It used to be different, but after living in the UK, where I spoke German, English, and Turkish at the same time, and I think after at least having a third dominant language in my life, I stopped dreaming in a specific language. So it feels like...
So it differs, or you can't remember?
I feel like it's outside a language. Like I can't sort of...
put the finger on.
Yeah, I can't say it was this or that language. And I think it's an interesting game as well, right? To try and perceive the world outside of a language. I think... maybe for all the people who are listening, to try and think of a situation that doesn't have a word in any language that you know of. Training this muscle is very...
That's true.
It's very difficult.
That gets complicated.
But I have one example. It's actually the only one I can think of right now. But when you enter a room and you can feel that people have been laughing in the room. But
you don't know why, not about you, because they've been talking about you?
There's no one in the room.
Okay.
They've left. But you walk into a room and you can feel there's a good energy. There's... it has a joyful energy. In German, we have dicke Luft, right? When you walk into
But dicke Luft would be a bit more anger.
Yeah, right. So you have it for negative emotion. Yeah. But you can, I feel it when I walk into a room. I can sort of sense, it's, people have been laughing here.
Dünne Luft. Thin air.
Yeah. And before our conversation started, before the cameras were on, we were talking about how we sort of miss physical presence of people. And I think, at these times during the pandemic, we don't have the words yet, but we know that there's a difference between a physical presence and a digital presence, where there's a different energy in a room. And I think we will probably in the future come up with words that describe these kind of energies. But feeling it and talking about feeling it is the way you change a language.
Yeah. At least for me, it makes me feel present in the moment and happy that you have been here in person, Kübra Gümüşay.
Thank you so much for
having me. Thank you so
me.
much for being with us tonight. I know we are a bit like 6 minutes behind schedule, so it's 6 minutes past 6 actually. If you want to go on with the discussion, please feel free, but I know it has been already a long day, so probably you would like to grab some food or have some dinner, take a break. We will be back at 7. We now take a break. Actually, interesting piece we're listening to at Listening Theatre. It's called Death Row Book Club. I'm not revealing too much at the moment, but it's one person telling his story from his perspective. So that will be our Listening Theatre at 7 p.m. That was Kübra Gümüşay. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.
And you out there, have a good break. See you later.